Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 253 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Mike Arnold is back on the show again today to talk to us about his recent hunting trip to the West African country of Cameroon. We'll discuss how his trip went, what the hunting is like there, and we'll also talk about a few other examples of the benefits of well-regulated hunting for both the local population and wildlife in general in that area. Now, Mike last joined us in episode 213, where we talked about the astonishing transformation of Mozambique's Coutada 11 over the past 30 years, due in large part to the conservation and hunting practices implemented by Mark Haldane's Zambezi Delta safaris. In fact, Coutada 11 is one of the very few places in the world, if not the only place in the world, where both lion and cheetah, which were previously extinct in the area, have been successfully reintroduced. Now, Mike tells that incredible story in his book, Bringing Back the Lions. I highly recommend getting a copy of that book if you haven't already read it. Mike did a great job of telling the story in an entertaining and engaging manner. Pick up a physical copy, download the Kindle version, or get the audiobook version of Bringing Back the Lions at thebiggamehuntingblog.com/lions, Lions, or click the link in the show notes. Now, finally, make sure you're on my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get my free ebook when you do that, plus you'll also receive the emails I send out every weekday. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy receiving them and how much they look forward to hearing from me every day. So make sure you are getting those emails too by going to huntingguns101.com. Okay, let's get started talking to Mike about his trip to Cameroon. Okay, well, Mike, it is great having you back on the show. We last had you on in episode 213 to talk about your book, Bringing Back the Lions, with the with all of the information that you provided and the interesting stories about the Zambezi Delta safari outfit there and how they reintroduced lions and all of the cool things that have gone along with their conservation success story in that area. So check out that book if you haven't already for the listener. But in any case, Mike is back, and we're also talking about Africa with him, but he didn't go to Zimbabwe or to South Africa or even Mozambique. He went to a place that's a little bit more exotic even for Africa with a trip to Cameroon. So it sounds like you had a heck of a spring break, Mike. And I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much, John, for having me back on. And yes, it was definitely not a beach spring break trip. I can honestly say that. I didn't go to Florida. That's true.
Well, so I guess to start out with, what made you want to go on this hunt to Cameroon?
Well, there were a number of competing motivations there. Number one, as you mentioned, and I appreciate that. That's very gracious of you to mention my book that came out last year. I am working on another book, which will take a global look, not just focusing on Mozambique, but a global look at how hunters impact conservation and community outreach and ecosystem restoration and that sort of thing. And I wanted to go to, as you mentioned, a bit more of an unusual, less traveled to African country, to look at what was going on there with regard to conservation and community outreach through international trophy hunting dollars and euros, et cetera. And I have always been fascinated with Cameroon. Everything that I've read about it has made it sound, as you said, exotic. And I like strange and weird places. I've spent a lot of my biological research time in those kinds of places all over the world. And I wanted to try hunting and doing research for this new book in a place like that. And so I looked around and I said, oh my goodness, Cameroon has all these wonderful species in it of animals to hunt, but also of areas to see and people to see and cultures to see. So it's all of that mixed together, I guess. A bit of a travel bug that I have. So,
well, speaking of travel, what was the travel like to get to Cameroon? Did you have to go through France to get there?
I did, and I went through Charles de Gaulle. On the way there, I went straight from Atlanta. We live close to Atlanta. At the University of Georgia in Athens. So I flew direct, nonstop, going to Charles de Gaulle, and then Charles de Gaulle, I went to Douala in Cameroon, and then from there to Gaira, and that's the drop-off point where I was picked up by a car. Four-wheel drive, and then we drove down rutted roads for literally 12 hours, but that was really, a lot of that was my fault. It should have been a shorter trip, but I made my poor PH and his other driver were having to stop for me to do photography. I laughingly said editors are really mean. They make you do all of this photography, but I was having a great time. But it was a long trip. I think traveling over and back, it was probably around 40 hours total of travel time. That's not in the air, obviously, or on the road, but it was just, sitting around airports as well. So,
Tell me again, so you flew into Douala and then you went to where on your next flight?
It's Douala, you go to Gaira, and that's up in you're up in the eastern towards the Chad border, is where you're headed. You're real close to the Chad border, actually. And so, when you're in the concession I was in, so and I'm probably mispronouncing. You and I laughed about it. Mm-hmm. Look, I'm from West Texas. I can't pronounce anything correctly.
So I'm looking at Google Maps right now, and I think I see where you're talking about. And so yeah, quite a distance away from the capital where you went to.
It is, but it's not too bad of a flight. I actually we stopped off on the way there at another place, Yolande, and so it took a little bit longer, but not terrible. Those internal flights weren't bad at all.
Yeah, I mean, that Cameroon is just not that big of a country, and a flight is one thing, but driving even 100 miles across some of the roads, I can imagine in some of these places can take a real long time.
It really can, and that's one thing that you have to be willing to do, is to travel. It's like I always tell my students and others, is what you're doing, the drudgery of what you have to do sometimes, is it worth all the fun things and great things that you get out of it? And if it's not, then don't do it. But for me, to be able to hunt in those areas, to be able to see those areas, oh my goodness, I mean, it was hard travel, but it was well worth it.
You sent me a couple of articles that you'll publish in a couple different magazines about various aspects of this hunt. Say what the name of the concession was that you hunted again.
Javal is how I pronounce it once again, and it's like I mentioned to you earlier, when we were chatting about it, I heard, it depends on who you ask. The trackers, the PH, who's French.
Yeah.
Or me. But they have several. Milo Deary is the Safaris, is the outfitter. And they have a whole series of concessions in that area, which is a drier area. It's a wet, dry season. Okay, well, actually, Cameroon is entirely a wet, dry area, but it is a savanna, what they call a savanna, what I would call bush. And so, it has trees. There are two dominant trees. One of them, is like something that you would, you have the beans on it where you would see them on mesquite trees, and so it's that kind of a tree, but big, tall one. And then another one that's a little bit less tall, but you have those scattered woodlands, but they do call it a savanna area, but I would call it a savanna woodland area. as a biologist. So it's not, I guess I don't want to say savanna and people imagine out
the
of
Lion
Africa.
King. Yeah.
Yeah, or something like that. It's not like that. It's a mixed woodland, but open. It's not dense. My oil dairy has their concessions in the south, where I could have gone, but I chose to go to the savanna actually in this one to look at. But in the south, where they hunt bongo and forest sitatunga and, dwarf buffalo and that sort of thing, you're talking about dense tropical rainforest. So they have concessions there. But this is this mixed woodland, and it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous area.
So the concession that you hunted, they had buffalo, cobb, reedbuck, diker. Lord Derby's giant eland was there, right? Anything else?
Yes, that's right.
Of note?
Yeah, they have topee, they have roan, they have enormous roan. Oh my goodness, and they have enormous topee. Topee to me are almost mythological because you just don't see them. And the darn things were all over the place, and it was, my PH kept grinning at me and saying, I still have permits for topee. And I said, yeah, well, I'd have to sell my house. But not really. But, so they have that, and you had bushbuck. It was just, we never went anywhere. And remember, I'm the last person there at the end of their season, at the hottest point it was 105 degrees at least every day by 9 a.m. So you can imagine what that does for animal movements. They'd had all of their hunters come through, all of their safaris come through. So it had been shot over, quote unquote. And yet every time we went out, we saw shootable animals in every category you and I have mentioned now. It was a game-rich area. And now some days they were not moving real fast. You'd startle them out of the shade because it was so darn hot. But they were there. And so I was blown away. When I saw what the temperature was going to be because of hunting quite a bit before, I was a little concerned we wouldn't see anything, but we did.
I hunted Zimbabwe in the month of February about 10 years ago, and it sounds like your hunt was similar to mine in that respect. That was the only time I could get off work to go, and that's probably about the worst time that you can go there. Very, very hot, rains a lot, very, very thick, and kind of like what you're saying, an hour after the sun comes up, it's already over 100 degrees. Everything is bedded down. You're moving more at night because it's cooler, and it's just hard, and it's physically demanding, and the animals aren't moving, and you're just covered in sweat all the time. Now, looking at your photos that you sent me, it looked like there was a lot of brown in these photos. Were you there towards the end of the dry season in Cameroon?
Absolutely. You're exactly right. Yeah, we smelled rain, and we saw thunderstorms in the distance. But all of the rivers, sand rivers were completely dry. You didn't have to dig very far down. And the baboons, and they have some elephants in that area, but all of the animals were digging down into the sand rivers. And you'd hit water table, I don't know, maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet down. So the water was there. But everything was dry. Everything was burned off. They'd done their burning. The humans had done their burning, obviously, quite a bit earlier. But yes, they were expecting their rains to start within a couple of weeks after I left. I haven't contacted them to see, but that would have been normal.
And when does the normal hunting season run in that part of Cameroon anyway?
Well, as I mentioned in one of my articles, my PH said, look, we don't book people in March. Normally they don't. They do occasionally. So their hunting season, they start in late December. Quite often they go across Christmas, but just before Christmas in the savannah now. Mm-hmm. Now they're hunting in the tropical rainforest right now, okay, because the rains have started, right? So, or at least they'll start in early April. I think in about a week they start. So it depends on where you are. But in their Savannah concessions in this area, they're going from December, late December to usually late February, okay, or very early March at the latest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your hunt once you get to this concession that you're hunting. Seems like, like we talked about too, the highlight of your trip and the thing that you were most after was a West African savanna buffalo, and not just any buffalo either. You wanted a red one. So can you tell us a little bit about buffalo there, and then tell us about that hunt?
Okay. Yeah, so the West African savanna buffalo, I posted this photo of that. You've seen the photo as well, but a photo of me with it while I was there in camp. I posted it on a hunting blog or hunting Africa site on Facebook actually, and someone asked me, "Oh, is that a dwarf buffalo?" And I said, "Dwarf forest buffalo," and I said, "No, it's heading that direction. In terms of biologically, it doesn't have the big boss." The West African savanna buffaloes don't have the boss that you see on a Cape buffalo. They're not as large in body. They're still big animals, darn it. They can run over you, but they're not like a Southern Cape buffalo that you would have hunted or I would have hunted in Mozambique and that sort of thing. So they're not that large. And like I say, don't have the boss. They also have color phases that you mentioned. So I use the analogy of black bears. I have always wanted to go out somewhere and get a cinnamon-colored black bear. I have a beautiful trophy from Idaho, big black bear that was black, and that I'm very happy with it. Don't get me wrong. But I'd always loved, I love that cinnamon color that I've seen in some of the photos, reddish, off reddish, blonde, whatever. So years ago, I read about these West African savanna buffaloes and saw photos of red-colored, ochre-colored animals. And I just thought they were the prettiest animal I'd ever seen in my life, in terms of buffaloes anyway. They have blonde highlights, huge, long hairs coming out of their ears. I mean, they're just really photographic, if nothing else. Photogenic, if nothing else. So if I was going to hunt one there, I wanted to get a mature red buffalo. And the title of my article is "Buffalo as Red as My Hair," because I have red hair like my mama did. And so I laughed and told my PH that at the very first. I said, "I need a buffalo that's the color of my hair." And he laughed and he said, "Well, look, we will do our best." Now, having said what I just said, I just want to point out that there are color phases in all these herds that we ran into. You would see black, almost as black as a Cape buffalo as you would see, like you would have seen in Zimbabwe, I saw in Mozambique, a black buffalo. Normally the black forms, the black color phases are the largest individuals, okay, the largest bulls. They have the largest horns, they have the longest, they just are, and they're big-bodied. They dwarf the red buffaloes that are there. And I don't mean that they're, 3 times the size, but you can see as you're glassing the herd, you can see those black buffalo, and they're inches taller than the red forms. So their horns are normally going to be, larger, et cetera. So if you want the largest horned animals, you go for the black ones. But once again, I was really, really interested in a mature red. So every time we bumped buffaloes and we followed them, we tracked them several times and never found a mature red. We found several very, very nice black animals. But my PH, Hervé, was very, very good. He could have, you can imagine a PH might want to strangle a client for not taking the biggest darn buffalo, because it's going to reflect well on them. If I put it into SCI or something and it goes higher, it'd be better for them. But they, the interesting thing is he understood. He said, I know why you want this. It's fine. And we will find you a mature red buffalo. So we kept on. That's what we did.
And you did end up getting one, I see. And it looks like I don't know that much about the Western Savannah buffalo, but it looks like a real nice one that you ended up getting, and red no less, too.
It was it's absolutely mature, but it's also very large. It actually is a very big animal. It had very nice horns on it. I knew, and I mentioned in the article that I wrote for Sports Afield that look, I'm 65 years old. I ran for 20 years. I was a runner. I don't do that anymore. I exercise regularly, but I can tell you, John, I was at the end of my I should say rope, but I mean I was at the end of myself physically, because we didn't really track these guys that long. If you think about it, it wasn't a 8-hour buffalo hunt or a 12-hour elephant hunt that some of your listeners are going, well, shoot, but it was so darn hot. We were in the broiling sun. We were not in shade, and it only took us an hour and a half to get it finally. Actually get the shot. But boy, I thought I was going to die. I really did, but there was no way I was giving up on it. And we got it at the very last instant. They were about to go into an open area that they would not have stopped in, and it would not have allowed us to continue to follow them. But every time we got to a place and got set up, there were 3 that we could have taken, all red. This was the largest and most mature of all of them. And those darn 3 kept, always somebody, a cow or a big black one or whatever in front of them. And finally, and this was a long shot, I will confess this. This was a very long shot for a buffalo. I'm not recommending it. I had a very accurate rifle. I was very comfortable with it. I'd already taken animals with it. But it was a 150-yard shot. And he was frontal. And it went in. It got both of his lungs, destroyed both of his lungs as it went through. And, he was dead on his feet. But he did go about 80 yards before dropping. But I'll just mention that I understand that was a long shot. And it's not trivial. And I'm not being flippant about it, because the other buffalo, the Cape buffalo I took at 20 yards, and I'm much more comfortable with that, with dangerous game. But this was the only shot we were going to get, and he was in the clear, and I did feel comfortable with the shot, so I actually took it.
Well, tell us a little bit about the rifle and cartridge you used to take that buffalo and everything else on your hunt with.
Well, and that's a funny thing. I sent you that article. I have an article coming out that's called One Caliber to Rule Them All, and it's making fun of myself, basically. It's poking fun at me. I had a friend who called me a gun rider at one of the safari club. It was actually a Dallas Safari Club. He's a PH friend of mine. He introduced me and said, "This is Mike Arnold. He's a gun rider." And I let him do that. And I should have corrected him, because I'm not Craig Boddington. I'm really not a gun rider. I mean, I'm writing a review right now for a Mauser M18. I'm about to write another review for a Blauser R8. I do write reviews. I do a lot of firearm reviews, but I'm not a gun rider. I'm not a person who has experience with all these different rifles and pistols, etc. And one of the calibers I had never fired in my life, which will shock a bunch of folks, I'm sure, it was a 375 H&H. I got to camp, and my PH, everybody said, "Look, I have this Seiko 375. It's very accurate, but I'd like you to try it." And I said, "Sure, that's fine." But I said, I'm hunting a whole range of different sized animals, everything from a red flank diker up to one of your red buffaloes, hopefully. And he said, "Yeah, and this cartridge is great for that. And I thought, yeah, I've read that, but I'm not sure I believe it, especially, you know, when you start shooting cobs with it or reed buck or whatever the heck it is. Nigerian bowhor reed buck that's there. But anyway, so I said, okay, you know, let's give it a go. And it really was very accurate. It shot really well for me. And, you know, I was very confident with it. And so that's the rifle was that, Norma ammunition, 300 grain, and it was, controlled expansion bullets in those. That shot the best for me we shot it out to over 100 yards, when I was, you know, on the bench, and trying it out. And it, you know, I touched, you know, I got groups with that at out over 100 yards where, you know, the holes were touching one another. And so I felt comfortable with it. I felt very confident with it. And I assumed, and this is once again how I poked fun in my, you know, or mentioned in my article, I assumed, number one, a 375 was going to kick too much, and I was going to get, you know, wary of it. Now I've shot 458 lots and things like that, so I don't know why I had that in my head, but I assumed, you know, maybe, you know, and it's not going to be accurate enough to hit something as small as a red flank diker for me, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I was wrong on all of those. Number one, it was very comfortable to shoot, even with these nice, powerful loads for buffaloes. You know, it was very comfortable to shoot. There's no muzzle brake or anything on it, and it didn't need it. And so that's the rifle I use. It looked like it was, you know, it has been well used over the years by his clients, by the folks coming through there and also in the forest. You know, it looked a little bit worse for wear, but it was mechanically perfect and it was very accurate.
Well, and this hunt that you went on is a perfect demonstration of the utility of that rifle. Because actually, I guess to back up for a second, did you shoot your buffalo first? Was that the first thing that you got on?
No, I didn't. No, the first animal I took was a cob. Mm-hmm. It's like a puku if you've been to Zambia, if any of your listeners have been to Zambia. So it's one of those animals in that group. So it was a cob, a beautiful one. And then we shot the buffalo, and then we shot the bowhor reed buck, and then at the very end, the day before the last day, next to the last day, we shot a red flank diker, a little tiny thing. So that was the order of the animals taken.
You know, it's not uncommon on a hunt for it to go like that, right? You are, you know, primarily after buffalo, and while you're, you know, looking for a good buffalo, you bump into something else that's really nice that you're going to end up shooting. Or you're after kudu and you bump into a nice buffalo. And if you have a 30-06, that's great for the kudu, but you don't want that in your hands if you bump into a nice buffalo or elephant or whatever the case may be while you're hunting. Whereas this is a nice rifle where it is adequate or even good for buffalo, and at the same time, it's more than enough for anything smaller than that, but it's not going to beat you to death. It's not super heavy to carry, and it's not going to destroy anything else that you shoot that's smaller either.
Absolutely. I will mention that too. But let's take the red flank diker. That finishes out, well, I now have 10 tiny 10, you know, pygmy antelopes, and some will argue, well, that doesn't count or whatever. But anyway, I have 10 different species, and I can tell you that the ones that I've shot with my 7mm rim mag, which I love, those I had to be so careful with because the speed of the bullet, the relatively light bullet, will absolutely blow them apart if you're not careful, if you hit a bone. Mm-hmm. And so with the 375 or something like that, a 416, for example, if you're comfortable shooting a 416, the size of the bullet and the relatively slow velocity, they're not slow, but you know what I mean. I mean, relatively slow compared to something like, for example, my 7mm means that it's going to make a hole, but it's not going to blow them apart. It's just going to go through without expanding, and it's going to move through, and they're going to drop, like the red flank diker just dropped to the shot, obviously. And so anyway, I just want to throw that out there. And my PHs have always told me that, that I'm in danger when I'm using these high velocity cartridges that I'm using for my plains game, that it's hard on smaller animals.
How big is a red flank diker?
They're about 20 pounds maximum, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
I would say
really small.
Yeah, so I would say they're about like let's see, I just went to Mozambique. I would compare them to a red diker. If you know what size that is, they're smaller than a bush diker, a little bit smaller than a bush diker, so a gray diker that they have there in Cameroon. They're a short little animal. They're beautiful too. I mean, they're gorgeous markings on the little guys and gals.
So with a 300 grain bullet out of a 375 H&H, you've got a muzzle velocity probably around 2,500 feet per second, and your 7 mag, depending on what bullet you're shooting, you may be upwards of 3,000 feet per second on it. So big difference. And I shot a Steenbok, which for the listeners, about the size of a bush diker, maybe a little bigger. You're around 30 pounds. They're a small animal, but they're one of the bigger ones in the pygmy antelope. And I shot it with a 30-06, and I hit shoulder blade on it, and it dropped it in its tracks. But it just blew a hole, the size of my fist on the opposite side of them, and it wasn't a giant deal. I got it turned into a full body mount, and I just have that side facing the wall when I have him put up, and the taxidermist did the best he could putting it back together. But had I shot him with a 300 grain controlled expansion bullet, or even better, a 300 grain solid out of a 375, it would have just made a 375 caliber hole, and that would have been the end of it.
It is, and it really is. You have to think about the effect and where you're placing, the bullet that you have. I'm not arguing that you have to shoot everything with the 375, obviously. Most of us are not going to be carrying those around for a plains game safari or, going after whitetail or whatever the heck we're doing. But I became a believer. I will purchase a 375 H&H at some point in time, probably not in the too distant future, because I was so impressed. It was just so much fun to shoot as well.
And the interesting thing about that cartridge, too, is that it is one of those cartridges where it also has a high enough velocity and a flat enough trajectory where it's not a big deal to take a 250-yard shot with it if that's what you're presented on something. So what were your shooting distances like on all of your animals? So you said the buffalo was at about 150. What about the rest of them?
Well, you're going to laugh at me now, and probably your listeners are going to write in nasty notes and ask you to send them to me. The longest shot was on the darn buffalo.
Yeah.
The cob was at 80 yards, and it dropped within 20 yards. The reed buck was at about 50-ish, and it just went feet and fell over. And then the little red flank diker was at no more than 20, because it had its head stuck in a bush, and we were able to look at him and see what he was. So, but the buffalo was the longest shot. It was by far the longest shot.
That's a long-ish shot for a buffalo, but I think you're being too hard on yourself for the nasty grams and whatnot. It's that's one of the things where you try to get closer if you can, and if you can't, then you either pass on it or you do the best you can. And I've played with it, about it, but it is true that my PH turned to me, and he said, "This is our last opportunity." We were whispering back and forth. We were behind a tree that was about 4 inches in diameter, and he looked at me and he said, "If we step out, he's at 150 yards. Can you make the shot?" And I said, "Yeah, this rifle is accurate."
And so I felt comfortable with it. I actually did. And I knew that he was, he had he had a 458 actually side by side, and we were also carrying a 416, one of the trackers. So we knew that we had sufficient backup. And as soon as I fired, the deal was, I told him, look, Hervé, as soon as I fire, if it doesn't drop, and I didn't expect it to with the 375, I'll be honest. I said, as soon as I shoot, I'd really like you to go ahead and back the shot up. And he did. He immediately backed it up. And so there was no danger. I had a very, good shooting PH who knew what he was doing. He hunts elephant in the forest all the time, for example. So he's very good on dangerous game. So I was comfortable with it, yes.
Now, we've talked at length about your buffalo and a little bit about the diker. Tell us a little bit more about the cob, though. That's a more unusual animal that most of us aren't familiar with.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. This is, again, one of those things where historically I had this desire to I watched videos from the 1980s because I'm old. And, and I'd seen these videos of people hunting in Zambia. And for some reason, I was captivated by the puku there. I mentioned it earlier. And it's a cob. I mean, it's in this group. And when I knew I was going to Cameroon, I thought, the cob is the iconic antelope for Cameroon. It's on a lot of their, material there, and it's pictured. It's sort of like the impala in many places, but it's not related to the impala. But it has these horns that, if it's mature, they go back, they sweep forward, and then they're parallel when you look, it faces you or you look at it from the back. And so the horns get their length from that, back flip and then flip forward. And then as they parallel up, they get a little bit longer. And it's a beautiful antelope, just a gorgeous antelope. And that was why I wanted it, is because I'd always wanted an antelope with those kinds of horns on it from Africa. And you and I talked about it. All of us have our idiosyncrasies, right? I mean, I know you must have species over there that they're your favorite, and they may not be mine, but this is one of those that was like that for me.
Now, it looks like I'm looking at a picture of a cob right now, and yeah, it does look very similar to an impala and to a puku. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm looking at them, looks like it's a little bit bigger than an impala. Yes. We keep talking about their similarity to impala. Do you find them in really big herds like impala? Are they just kind of everywhere over there?
They are. The cob is very, very common in these concessions, okay? And are they in the same size herds? You do have the males, that do end up with the harems or the harems that are, that you'll see large numbers of them. Most of the animals over there are herd animals. Some are not, like the red flank diker, is you find them in male-female pairs, and that's normal for those little guys, actually. But the cob, yes, you do find them in largish herds, but you also find the reed bucks that way as well. The bohor reed bucks, you find, we would see fairly large groups of those as well.
And, looking at the picture of the reed buck you sent me, that one looks like you could almost pick up that reed buck and drop him off in South Africa, and he would just blend right in with the reed bucks I've seen there.
He really is. Craig Boddington, once again, to quote him, he hunted with this outfit, My Old Deer. He's hunted with them several times, I believe. But anyway, one of the videos I saw with him with one of their PHs, he called it the medium size. I have a mountain reed buck from South Africa, and now I have this one. And it is true. This one is larger, significantly larger, actually, than my mountain reed buck, both in body size as well as in horn size. So, and then if you go up to the common reed buck, which is what we saw in Mozambique all the time, obviously in the Zambezi Delta, they're the next step up, and they're much larger.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about the anti-poaching teams and the community outreach that you described in this area. It sounds like you see in many places where you have a very well-run safari operator in a well-managed concession, there's a stark difference between the land inside the concession and the land outside the concession that doesn't have those benefits. Can you talk some more detail about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned that it took us 12 hours to go from, where I landed at the final airport in Cameroon, and then driving to the concession. And a good bit of that, like I said, kidding about it, was photography, et cetera. But it's not that long, as you mentioned. It's only probably about 180 miles-ish. Mm-hmm. But as you travel along that road, it is a landscape completely devoid of wildlife. And that's the truth in developing countries everywhere. It would have been the truth here in the U.S. after we moved through in North America from the East Coast to the West Coast. We have to keep in mind, and I've mentioned this a number of times before with folks, is you keep in mind when Europeans landed on that East Coast and moved west to the Mississippi, they devastated the landscape. They devastated the wildlife. There were no white-tailed deer in Georgia until 1930s. They went extinct from us. Turkeys were gone. Ducks were gone. Elk were gone. Buffalo, bison, which were here east of the Mississippi, were gone. So just keep that in mind, that model works in any developing country, sadly, in one sense. So as we're traveling, it's basically a moonscape. It's devastated. As we're traveling from that last city to the concession, it's been devastated, first of all, by wood poaching, i.e. that they cut down everything that they can to make charcoal and to heat their homes with, but then they also overgraze it. Cattle and goats, especially cattle, are kept as a bank account in Cameroon. What that means is that they don't raise them to eat them. They raise them because they're worth so much money to sell to somebody else who wants to build up a herd. So it's literally a bank account. So you have hundreds and hundreds of cattle in this area, and you have cotton farms and et cetera. Now, please remember, I grew up on a horse ranch, and there was cotton all around us, okay? So I'm not getting after agriculturalists. I love agricultural systems, but, it also means wildlife is gone. And so the wildlife is gone, but when you got to the concession, because of anti-poaching, which also includes anti-wood poaching, okay, and cattle grazing, keeping the cattle out of these areas, and it's all illegal if they go in and cut wood or graze their cattle there. It's all illegal. They are not allowed to do that. But once you get to the concession, because of the anti-poaching teams that are patrolling these areas, it automatically, you have songbirds, you have plant life, you have termite mounds, you have everything else that you didn't have for the last 11 and a half hours. So,
yeah, big difference once you cross over that border.
Absolutely. It's, I call it an invisible line in the Zambezi Delta, and it really is. It's almost like one of those, invisible electric lines that we use to keep our dogs in our yards. It really is a barrier, and in this case, it's a barrier to keep things out that would destroy those habitats.
Now, Mayo Oldiri Safaris has their own anti-poaching teams, but their way of doing things and the way they're equipped is very different from what is the case in other places like the Zambezi Delta. So talk to us a little bit about them, how they do things, and what sort of problems they get to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, unlike Mozambique, for example, or you would have seen in Zimbabwe, I'm sure when you were there, unfortunately, the anti-poaching squads in Cameroon are not allowed to carry firearms. The Cameroon government is worried that armed insurrection will occur if you have too many people basically running around in the bush with firearms. I would argue, and I do in my article, and this sounds a little bit harsh, but I'm not trying to be that way. But like our own government here, I feel like politicians don't realize that the way that you avoid those kinds of insurrections is by governing well and treating your people well, not by putting more and more restrictions and laws on them. That's my little soapbox for a moment. So what the problem is for these guys is that they are sent out into the bush for, say, 9 or 10 days. They only have staffs, just sticks with them. And the cattle herders who come in, who want to, graze through this area, the wood poachers, and of course the animal poachers are quite often, more often than not, they're armed. And so if they choose, they can wound and even kill the anti-poaching squad members. Recently, one of the guys, I WhatsApped with him several months ago now, and when he popped up on my screen, he had a huge bandage on the side of his face. And I said, "Good grief, Gray, what happened?" And he said, "I actually came off easy." He said the guy next to me was severely wounded by the shotgun blast from the poacher, but I just caught it, a little bit in my face. I mean, he almost lost his eye and he could have been killed. So it's that kind of limitations for them, and yet they still go out because they believe in the process and they see the benefits of the process for their own communities as well as for the ecosystems that are there.
Yeah, very interesting. So, you've talked a little bit about the wood poaching. I'm also assuming that there is some bushmeat poaching that goes on there as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. The poachers who come in, there's a variety of ways, just like all the different developing countries, especially in Africa. There's a variety of methodologies that the poachers use in these areas. So let me just run through those. When I was there, and this one to me is most tragic and also the most vicious. When I was there, the teams caught 3 poachers, 2 sets, a set of 2, and then a individual poacher. Both of those captures involved also confiscation of highly toxic material and poisons that will kill an animal almost immediately. And those poisons are, because it's the end, as you and I talked about, you asked about, it was the end of the dry season. So you have very few open water areas, so watering holes. And the poachers know that. And so they go in around midnight because they know that the animals will come in, whatever is coming in, will water in the mornings, just like white-tailed deer here and or anything else here. And so they pour the poisons in after midnight. They back off 300 to 500 yards, camp, and then just go pick up the carcasses of the dead animals the next morning. Now, the viciousness of that is that they then go and sell that meat, which is now tainted with the poison in markets, which can obviously poison people. But they also poison people who come and draw water out of those holes.
Jeez.
And they don't, when in the interviews, that question was asked by my PH to the 2 guys that their photographs in that article for Roland Ward that I wrote about this. And he asked them, how can you poison these knowing that you're going to get young children who are probably the ones who are going to come and get the water, or girls or whatever else? You're going to poison them and kill them. And they said, it's their fault if they drink that water. And so the viciousness of this, the mentality of the lack of empathy towards not only the animals, but also the human beings that they're affecting was stark. It was, you know, it was difficult to stomach, I have to admit. That's during the dry season. I will mention that they also then chase them with dogs. They spotlight them at night and shoot them with shotguns. And then, of course, they use the normal, quote unquote, that we think about. They use snares and gin traps to also, during the wetter seasons, they'll use those.
Man, so surely there must be some tension between the people that are poachers and the local community then, if things like that keep happening where, they're selling meat that has poison in it. They're, just straight up poisoning people as a byproduct of their efforts to get animals. What is the relationship like between the safari operator and the local people?
The really great thing about in all of the areas that I've been in, and now I've been in many different countries, and not just in Africa, in Mexico and elsewhere, the same benefits are there, and I'm going to be a little bit not crude, but a little bit pragmatic about it. If it pays, it stays. Really is a valuable mantra to remember. In other words, if it has value above the value of being able to bring in some protein to either your family or to a village or whatever, if it has value above that and it's sustainable value, then the locals they're not dumb. They know, these are not unintelligent folks. They can see the benefits. They can see the safari outfitters here. Let's take My Old Dairy. They have helped establish a very large hospital in a local community. I mean, a hospital, not just a clinic. This is for inpatients. This is for OBGYN. This is for optometrists. I mean, they have that they have helped establish. They're building a new school for school children from 2 villages while I was there. We got to visit that. And they're also providing protein, meat. My buffalo, we took over 200 pounds to a local boarding school while I was there. It was lovely, and that'll give them, months worth of food for, meat protein for these kids. And so it's, the local community is very, very grateful. On top of all that, obviously, you have employment that they would not have in these rural areas, and employment that pays very well, relatively speaking, for even if they have a job or a small shop or something. The salaries that these guys and gals are making in these places through the safari outfitters is much higher than they would get in their local communities.
All right, so it seems like a very similar story with maybe just some slight twists here and there to what you would see in other areas of Africa where you have a well-managed hunting area with a good safari operator that's running a good business, practicing sustainable use of their of the animals that live there, while at the same time developing a good relationship with the people in the surrounding villages and whatnot then too, huh?
It really is. This new book, the tentative title, is Many Paths to Eden. And what I mean by that is that, ecosystem restoration, community outreach, there really are different ways of doing it. But, it's very similar how we skin that cat. And the benefits for human beings and for the ecosystems, there's a common formula there. And I think we need to just understand the extent. People, especially non-hunters, I'm trying to reach, I'm hoping will understand the extent of how much hunting is done. Not just over in Africa, but here in North America, in the U.S., and Canada, and Mexico, in South America. et cetera, how much it's done to restore these places and the people there.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what the future holds for you, especially with this upcoming book that you keep alluding to.
I know I keep plugging it, but it's not there yet. But my wife and I we're heading to South Africa and Mozambique. We're going back there in early June for a 3-week trip. The trip is going to include, I'm a professor of genetics at the University of Georgia, and I do genetics of wildlife at times and that sort of thing. So we've been invited. One of the coolest parts is we're going to be doing some rhino darting on a property where they have white and black rhino, and taking samples for genetics so that they know how to manage the herds and that sort of thing, and manage their populations. We're also going to Mozambique to write Sports Afield. The editor, Diana Rupp, has asked me to write an updated report on the lion introduction into Catata 11 to give them what is going on, but also the cheetah reintroduction that's there as well. And so because that is moving along, they're starting to have cubs and that sort of thing. So we're going to do that. That's the reason we'll go to Catata 11 for the most part. And then I'm going to hunt. Also, I can't go somewhere without hunting, John.
I know how you feel.
Oh my gosh, I love hunting. If I could hunt every day, someone asked me, you really love the conservation and the community outreach. And I said, I really do. I really do. I honestly love writing about it. I love seeing it. But I said, I'll just tell you, I'm a passionate hunter. If I could hunt every day, all day long, I'd probably choose that. I probably would choose that. I have to confess that. But I'll be hunting. It's an art for an article that I'm writing called Bush Bucks and Birds. I'm going to be hunting in the Eastern Cape, non-high fenced. I wanted to see agricultural areas where it was a mix of they're running an agricultural, like we would do a whitetail managed land in West Texas, where we're also running cattle, for example, Herefords or something. And so I'm going to hunt there for black wildebeest and bushbuck, and then we're going to go up into the mountains, and I'll hunt gray wings and that sort of thing. I'm taking Blouser has been kind enough to send me an R8 and 300 Win Mag, and then also an F16 shotgun and 12 gauge. So take those across and do some hunting while we're there as well.
Okay, well, very good. Sounds like you have quite a packed schedule coming up with a lot of fun stuff.
Well, we really are. The wackiest trip is, and I mentioned this earlier, is we're going to Pakistan in October for 3 weeks. Francis and I both, my wife and I both are going, and we're really looking. I know some of your listeners are out there saying, have they lost their minds? But we have a great contact there, wonderful folks there, and they're doing some amazing conservation efforts there for the Markhor and things like that. And so I'm going to do a little bit of hunting there too while I'm there for something called the chinkara, which is also called the Indian gazelle. And so it'll be a fun trip as well. So yeah, we're a little packed out this year.
And I thought I was busy. My goodness.
Oh, no, you are busy. You are busy.
Well, I am. Why don't we see about getting you back on the show after some of these trips? We'll talk about Pakistan, maybe talk about your rhino darting over there, things like that. That are especially just a little bit more unusual are always big hits with people that listen to the show.
Oh, I would love that. I love your show, so I would love to, I feel honored to be on it.
Well, excellent. Well, where can people go to learn to read these articles that you have written about your hunt in Cameroon and see some more of the pictures and get into some more of the details of what things were like over there?
Absolutely. They can go to my website, MikeArnoldOutdoors.com, and MikeArnoldOutdoors.com, all lowercase, and no spaces. And that's my website, and I make announcements on there, and I'm about to update it. I've just reached out to a number of editors about a number of articles, and I'll update it and just let people know what issues things are coming out in. But it also has a blog. It also has a site that you can buy the Bringing Back the Lions book, and I would encourage folks to look at that, and also to look at it. Many friends have told me it's been a really useful tool for giving to their non-hunting friends, and I've found it that way too. I've given it to a number of my not anti-hunting now, but non-hunting friends, and they have found it valuable to start digging into that.
I have read it. I read it last year before I interviewed you on the show, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I read your book and Sue Tidwell's book, Cries of the Savannah, right around the same time, and both really enjoyed them. And yours, I'm sure it's on. You can get a regular physical copy of the book. You can get it on Kindle, and you can get it on audiobook as well, right?
That is correct. You sure can.
There's a little bit of everything for people, no matter how they like to consume their books. I will put a link to where the listener can get it in the show notes. Same deal with a link to MikeArnold.com and learn more about that stuff there. And it was a absolute pleasure having you on the show as always, Mike. And I'm looking forward to having you back again soon, and we'll talk some more hunting.
Okay, thank you so much, John.
Now, I don't know about you, but I thought that was a fascinating discussion. I received multiple requests from listeners to have Mike on the show last year, and I'm glad he and I have gotten to know each other. Now, if you haven't already listened to it, make sure you go back and listen to episode 213, where he and I discuss the story of Mozambique's Coutada 11 in detail. I put a link in the show notes so you can easily access that episode. Similar to the case with Coutada 11, Mike's experience in Cameroon is another great example of the benefits of hunting. For one thing, the wildlife and natural ecosystems are better off. If you need proof, it is as easy as looking at the stark contrast between the moonscape outside the hunting concession versus the lush woodland savanna that's full of wildlife inside the hunting concession. Additionally, the local people are better off. They have well-paying jobs, access to healthy, that is to say, not poisoned meat, and some of the profits from the hunting concession get reinvested into the local communities, like that full-blown hospital Mike mentioned. Now, like Mike said in our previous interview, Bill Gates didn't do this, neither did Greenpeace, the Humane Society, PETA, etc. Nope. Hunters contributed the vast majority of the funding for these projects, as well as the anti-poaching teams that help protect the concession from poachers of all stripes. Now, I put a link in the show notes to an article that I wrote about the benefits of hunting in general. I don't talk about Cameroon, but everything that I say in that article applies to what is going on in Cameroon. So check that out if you want to learn more about this stuff. Now, plus, another result of these efforts is the fact that there are hunting concessions in certain parts of Cameroon that offer fantastic hunting for certain types of game that don't live in other parts of Africa. The southern African countries of Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique are all great, but you can't hunt animals like western savanna buffalo or red-flanked duiker in those places. So go check out MikeArnoldOutdoors.com to keep up with the latest developments from Mike. He's written a few great articles on this hunt that will be published in different outdoor publications, and he'll also put them on his site after they're published in those magazines. Go to thebiggameHuntingblog.com/lions and pick up a copy of his book, Bringing Back the Lions. And finally, go to huntingguns101.com to make sure you're on my email list. Links to all of those things are in the show notes. Now, the fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your dreams come true. If you have any questions you would like me to answer or topic requests for future episodes, email them to me at john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at @thebiggamehunter_, and you can also get in touch with me via direct message that way as well. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.